And thanks for staying up late with us on Detroit's only nightly political talk show covering all things people, power, and politics. Thanks for joining us. This is The Pulse. We have a packed show tonight. Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson are in Studio C talking about civility. You remember what that is? How civil are you when you disagree with people when it comes to politics? These veteran journalists take a closer look and a little bit more about their new book, what we all can learn tonight. Also, we're taking a closer look at how the budget bill affects our wallets. RE/MAX of Southeastern Michigan President Jeanette Schneider is in-house talking about how the bill could help all of us. We'll examine the impact on the housing market and property taxes. And Congresswoman Lisa McClain joins us with her take on the bill, her vote, and things she feels might not be getting enough attention. That's all just ahead, but right now we want to fly through some of the other big stories we're following right now. We have a lot to cover as always, so let's go. Starting with the birthright citizenship battle, President Trump's order ending the constitutional right blocked once again. Remember how the U.S. Supreme Court limited the authority of judges to issue nationwide injunctions? Well, stay with me here because that did not rule out using them in class action suits. So a judge hearing a class action suit in this case blocked the president from enforcing that order. Birthright citizenship is in the 14th Amendment. The Trump administration has a week to appeal. President Donald Trump upping his pressure on the Federal Reserve and Chairman Jerome Powell. You'll remember he's refusing to lower interest rates despite Trump's demands. Well, now the White House is sending a letter criticizing the plans at the central bank headquarters of renovation, saying it might have violated government rules. A White House deputy chief of staff is requesting a review of all previous and current plans, suggesting Powell wasn't honest while testifying to Congress about those renovation plans. He went on to question on social media, how can the American public be confident its monetary policy manager is acting in its best interests? And as recovery efforts continue after that devastating Texas flood that killed more than 100 people there are so many questions. Governor Greg Abbott is under fire for comments he made about the tragedy. He was asked by a reporter if he would call for an investigation, trying to figure out who's to blame. And this is what he said.
You ask, I'm going to use your words. Who's to blame? Know this. That's the word choice of losers. Let me explain one thing about Texas. And that is, Texas, every square inch of our state cares about football. You could be in Hunt, Texas, Huntsville, Texas, Houston, Texas, any size community, they care about football. High school, Friday night lights, college football, or pro. Know this, every football team makes mistakes. The losing teams are the ones that try to point out who's to blame. The championship teams are the ones that say, don't worry about it, man, we got this. We're going to make sure that we go score again, and we're going to win this game. The way winners talk is not to point fingers. They talk about solutions.
Got to give you some perspective here. At least 120 people are dead, more than 24 of them children and counselors at that Christian summer camp. More than 170 people still missing at this hour. Their families not knowing what happened, fearing the worst. And there are serious questions about whether there was enough warning given to allow people to get to safety. Those answers will eventually come out. But what we do know is oftentimes after a tragedy, there is an investigation. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, or somewhere in between, you should want to know what happened, how it happened, and how we can make sure it never happens again. It's times like this where people look to their leaders for comfort, not football metaphors. That's something that has to be provided here. Well, there's no easy way to transition out of a story like that, but we do have to talk about the impact of President Trump's budget bill. The spotlight has been on Medicaid, and with good reason, but it also impacts our homes and our wallets. RE/MAX of Southeastern Michigan President Jeanette Schneider is back in Studio C to take a closer look at that, and she's also answering a couple of viewer questions. And Jeanette, it's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So this is interesting. There are so many things that are in this bill that have been highly politicized. Obviously, it's a political bill. It's a bill, and have been talked about in a way to vilify the bill. But it's an 840-plus page bill, and there are other things in there, some of which is good. What are some of those good things?
Well, I think if you're looking at it from a housing perspective, there were a couple of things in there that I'm very excited for and happy that happened. A couple of them that are going to impact almost anybody who owns a home. The first one's going to be that mortgage interest deduction. That every time there's budget talks like this, there's always some rumors about whether it's going to be reduced or eliminated. It has now been permanently extended. So for those that itemize their deductions, that interest you pay on your mortgage is now permanently going to be something that you can count on being there. So that that's a very good thing. The second thing, and kind of in the same ilk, if you will, is the mortgage insurance deduction.
Yeah.
For people who put less than 20% down, they have to pay that private mortgage insurance, right? Kind of almost like an extra cost on low income and first time buyers. Well, now that has also been permanently extended, so that can be written off at tax time. So two really important things there. The other one that I'm probably a little bit more personally excited about is that SALT, the expansion of SALT. And now that stands for state and local taxes. And they've gone from a $10,000 cap to a $40,000 cap. So that is going to be very welcome news to a lot of folks.
That's a significant increase.
That's a huge increase,
cap.
yeah.
That's
Now that's temporary, where I said the other ones are permanently extended. The SALT is for 5 years. So that one is going to be debated about 4 years from now. You're going to hear probably a lot about whether that's getting extended.
Well, we want to get some viewer questions in here as well. Terry, thanks for writing into the Pulse. You're asking us right now, bottom line, who benefits from this bill and who will be affected? Look, that's a broad question, but beyond what you just said, we're talking about low-income housing as well. I know that's something that you want to talk about and that we want to talk about. There have been so many roadblocks that have been in the way relative to the tax structure that have stopped people from being able to have access. What changes in this bill?
Well, I mean, there's probably a couple of things that change, and one, it's not going to be immediate, but it's for the low-income housing tax credit. There has been some movement there. That's going to free up some more funds and more tax credits for builders and developers to take advantage of that in opportunity zones and whatnot. Now, that being said, this is not something you're going to see overnight. This is going to take time for that to trickle through and really mean something as far as new inventory of affordable homes, which, as you mentioned, is highly sought after and much needed.
We want to talk about more questions from the viewers. John is asking a question here about the bill itself, and basically he's saying, how would the big, beautiful bill be bad for the housing market, considering that mortgage rates are already dropping? Good question.
Well, the mortgage rates were dropping until the last couple of days. So, and that's going to continue to be a little bit of volatility there. I think the real estate market comprises about 15 to 18% of our country's GDP. So the way I look at this bill is anything that supports home ownership, no matter how small, no matter even if it takes a little time to roll out, ultimately is, I feel, a good thing for the housing market as a whole and potential and current homeowners. Some of this will take some time to see, but the reality of it is real estate impacts so much of our economy. Anything that helps it is a positive.
Well, and if you just yesterday on this program, we were talking with two political commentators about how important affordable housing is in general. And if you want to win an election in the state of Michigan, you have to make sure that people can stay here and afford to live here, and that contributes to it right here.
It does. I mean, and there's other little things in there. I mean, even keeping the current tax rate, and not increasing that, not having it reset, helps people to keep more of their money so they can save for a home. Doesn't make a home more affordable right now. That is still another issue. And like I said, anything that we can do because housing affordability is the biggest obstacle that people will say stands between them and owning a home. And interest rates, like we saw, tick down a little. They've ticked back up a little bit with the jobs report, and now with new tariff talk, they've kind of creeped, not a lot, but they've gone back up again. I think we're going to continue to see that. So I don't know that there's relief coming in mortgage interest rates, at least not anything major anytime soon. So anything else through the tax bill or other things that can be done is welcome relief.
I want to point this out to all our viewers out there because this political atmosphere is so divisive, and heck, we're about to talk about civility in just a few moments here. But I just think it's so important to keep in mind that in a large bill like that, we have spent a bulk of the time talking about the Medicaid cuts, and rightfully so. There are real concerns. And by the way, if you were curious about those conversations, please look at the Pulse Library. We have filled hours of our time talking about that, and we will continue to talk about it. But this is interesting to me because we talk about babies and children.
Yes.
Two last points that I want to make. There's a child tax credit that obviously is very helpful. I think $2,000 a pop that's extended.
Yes.
And also a baby bond. What is that about?
Now, the baby bond, as I understand it, is going to be for any child born from January 1st of this year to December 31st of 2028. So this is not something that appears, at least at this point, to be permanent. The government is going to put $1,000 in a savings account for that child. As I understand it, family can contribute up to $5,000 a year. And it's kind of almost like a savings account that somebody puts some seed money in to get started. Can't take money out till you're 18, tax deferred. Any growth that happens to those funds is tax deferred until you do a withdrawal. And if it's more of an eligible withdrawal, it's going to be a lower tax rate when you do. The hope is that there'll be a lot of people using that money to get into housing once they're an adult.
Having read pieces and parts of this bill and a large bulk of it, I can tell you it is a big bill for sure. You're talking about Medicaid, it can be pretty bad if you're looking at certain aspects of it, and it can be beautiful when you look at some of this housing stuff here. So it's a mixed bag, and one that we'll continue to examine here. Jeanette Schneider, thanks for doing that in earnest here tonight.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Good to see you as always. We're keeping the conversation about the budget bill going after the break. Congresswoman Lisa McClain joins us with her reaction to its passage. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2.
Thank you so much.
Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to talk about the president's budget bill, its impact, and a whole lot more. Congresswoman Lisa McClain is here via Zoom. And it is always good to see you, Congresswoman. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to ask you about this really important, the pieces and parts of this bill that you feel like aren't being talked about in the national media. And you and I had a conversation before we went on about how it's not sexy to cover when people get along. But there are things in this bill that are very bipartisan. Give us an idea as to what some of those pieces of this bill are.
Well, I think, to be honest, the biggest piece I think that is bipartisan, if you want to really know, is the Medicaid thing, is the Medicaid piece. And when I say that, everybody looks at me. But when we talk about Medicaid, if you did a standard deviation, the bulk of people want Medicaid to be there for the people who need it most, the elderly, the disabled, right? You know, the single mothers or the pregnant mothers. We all agree on that. That doesn't get talked about a lot. And a lot of times we demonize Medicaid and we fearmonger and say, oh my gosh, we're cutting Medicaid. Well, you know what? We are making sure that Medicaid is sustainable for the folks that need it most. And we did that by doing two provisions. One is we put in work requirements. One, Medicaid has grown since 2019 by 60%. 60% since 2019. Now, that had a lot to do with the expansion and whatnot. So we put a work requirement in there. If you're able-bodied with no children, and there's about 4.8 million people on those Medicaid rolls,
sure,
we're asking you to go back to work. And work can actually be a volunteer piece. We're not talking about elderly. We're not talking about the disabled. We want to make sure we shore Medicaid up for the people who actually need it most, so the program's here.
But Congresswoman,
that is a very important thing.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think that's something that everyone, as you say, on a bipartisan level agrees. In order to save and to cut costs and to actually make it effective for those who need it, we have to look for those things. But let me ask you about the facilities that could be affected, because I've spoken with several people in the elder law community here in Metro Detroit who are worried about the cuts to facilities. So we're not talking about individuals being cut off of it, but rather the facilities that need quality care for the people who are in there.
Sure.
Are you worried at all about the money that could be cut from those facilities here in Metro Detroit?
I'm not, and let me tell you why. First of all, we need to make sure that we take care of our elderly, and this is a very important problem. As our parents and our grandparents age, we're living longer, which is a good thing, but we got to take care of them longer. We reduce the patient to bed ratio, which I think is or not patient to bed ratio, excuse me, the nurse to patient ratio. So you don't have to have as many caregivers like we had to have under COVID and prior to that. So that should give them some relief. Also, I think you're talking about the provider tax. And the provider tax really doesn't hurt the hospitals. It is a state, Medicaid for that is a state-funded program that looks to the federal government for assistance. And we want to make sure that the states, when they receive that money from Medicaid, from the federal government for Medicaid, is actually using it for the hospitals and for the long-term care facilities, not as a slush fund as it's currently being used.
But Congresswoman, the rural clinics, we've spoken to a few of them. There are 3 hospitals in Michigan at risk right now of losing Medicaid funding. And these rural hospitals are especially concerned because of their patient ratio, but they still have to kind of follow the standards of running a full-fledged hospital. What about those rural hospitals?
They're not wrong. They're not wrong. So what we did actually the Senate did in the Senate version was put together a fund to take care of those rural hospitals. So instead of going through 7 layers of, and I think it's $50 billion, and instead of going through 7 layers of bureaucracy, those dollars in the rural communities and the rural hospitals in Michigan can go directly to that fund and get a dollar for dollar grant from that fund to use to help, hate to use the word subsidize, but subsidize, take care of the rural hospitals to the populations that sometimes need it the most. That is a huge fix that, again, nobody talks about. And the beauty of that is you don't have to go through the bureaucracy. It goes directly to the hospital.
And that grant money then kind of fills in those gaps, which is important.
It'll fill in the gap.
Yeah,
yes.
And I think it's important that we talk about this, and I'm glad you said no one's having this conversation. I'm glad we're having it here. Whether it be sexy or not is not the point. It's the point is to get the information out there, right? But I do have one last question. The facts. Reducing benefits and increasing copays. Big concern with a lot of people here. Are you concerned about that, and should people be?
Yeah, we need to take a look at healthcare. The healthcare system right now is broken. Again, that's another thing I think everybody agrees on, that we have to fix the healthcare system. I want to make sure, as I think a lot of people want to make sure, that everybody can get the benefits they deserve with the least amount of out-of-pocket expense that they can have. And that's what we're trying to do. And again, a lot of that issue falls in bureaucracy, right? So if you get a dollar of benefit, we want to make sure that that dollar of benefit goes directly to the patient, not 62 cents of that, but 97 cents of that. And that's the key that we're trying to fix, along with the waste, the fraud, and the abuse. We're hard pressed, and I think, again, we would all agree on this, that government runs so efficiently, there's no room for improvement. Come on, there's room for improvement. We all have to take a look, take a step back and say, hey, what can we do better? What can we fix? And that's exactly what we're trying to do in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Wow. Listen, $36 trillion of spending isn't sustainable. Medicaid right now isn't sustainable.
Well, Congresswoman, what about the $3 trillion deficit increase? Is that sustainable?
Well, it's the bottom line that counts, provided you know how to count. So let's talk about that. The bill actually cuts $1.6 trillion. We found savings, $1.6 trillion. We've never done that before. That's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is the growth, or the growth piece of it, the revenue piece that you'll come in.
Sure.
The CBO scored it at 1.8. We haven't had a 1.8 growth rate since maybe World War II. I mean, historically, it's about 2.2, 2.3. Right. For every 0.1% of growth we get, so 1.8 to 1.9, is 1.5 trillion in revenue. So they scored it at 1.8. If we got to 2 million or 2 trillion, we're at even now.
And listen,
so again, it's the bottom line that counts.
And I think it's important that you were able to say that and we were able to talk about that point, because it is awfully important. People are discussing it right now. And you know what? We're out of time on this conversation, but Congresswoman, that means we'll have to meet again and talk about this in detail again. And we look forward to doing that with you again.
Yeah, Roop, thanks for doing what you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Congresswoman Lisa McClain on The Pulse tonight. The last election put the conversation about civility front and center, and it's one that's still going. 2 veteran journalists are writing the book on it. That's next on The Pulse. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This is The Pulse. Joining us now to talk about civility and politics, Nolan Finley with the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson with Bridge Detroit. Both of them literally writing the book on civility, and we thank you both for joining us here.
Thank you.
We only have a few short minutes here, but I want to get right into it. Civility book is what it's called, a guide to building bridges across the political divide. You two actually don't always see eye to eye.
We never do.
Never see eye to eye, excuse me, correction, on politics. But here you are, friends working on a book together. What does that say, Stephen, about where we could be if we wanted to?
It says it's possible, right? That it's not out of reach. What we try to do in the book, though, is try to help other people understand how we do it. Like, what are the rules that we observe, and what are the customs that have kind of grown between us over 18 years that allow us to have really spirited, sometimes bitter arguments, but not have it destroy the chance for us to actually have a real relationship and be friends.
So you have a couple different chapters: what civility is and why it matters, cause and effects of civility, active listening is another one. Dropping assumptions. I found that to be really interesting. Nolan,
That's the key.
what are some assumptions that you have to drop about people who think differently?
Well, we all make assumptions when we hear about somebody and we hear about what their politics are. We assume we know them based on the descriptors. And what we urge in our Civility Project and in that book is to fill the information gaps with actual knowledge. Get to know the person who's sitting on the other side of the divide. Ask questions. And we find that if you ask people why they believe the things they do, you gain a greater respect. And Steve and I have done that ourselves. I used to think he had been dropped on his head as a baby, and when we sat down and talked,
I think he thought that of you as well, right? Exactly.
We sat down and talked about why he's a progressive and why I'm a conservative. We gained a little better understanding and a greater respect. We don't necessarily agree. We don't agree, but we understand each other a little better. And our driving principle at Civility Project is all good people come to their opinions in the same way. They take the information, the data available, they run it through the filters of their personal experiences and values, and they come up with an opinion. If it's different than yours, doesn't make them evil or sinister.
And if we look at the data, which you've looked at in the book, you basically say, I think 66% of the Democrats that were polled or looked at, and 50% of the Republicans say they have few friends on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah.
Think about it, 66% of Democrats,
Yeah.
I don't even have friends on the other side of the aisle.
Right.
Yeah.
50% of Republicans. So Debbie Dingell and Fred Upton, two lawmakers, have changed the dynamic, at least in that relationship, and we can reflect on that. That's been a huge inspiration for this book, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
They wrote the foreword.
They wrote the foreword for the book, and are both good friends of ours. It is possible. One of the things that we focus on in the book, though, is the number of sources that are pushing us to not do this, right? Social media, the 24-hour cable news environment really profit in some ways off of us being afraid of each other, being suspicious of each other. And look, I'm a big fan of both. I spend a lot of time on social media. I like to watch 24-hour cable news. But I think that the tenor of those platforms has changed in a way that it encourages us to come apart. And as individuals, there's not a reason to do that. In your family, in your neighborhood, in your school community, your religious community, you can reach out to people who you don't agree with.
Let's take agency back in our relationships and actually have the power to say, here's how I want to move forward. Nolan, what's the first step in doing that with somebody who perhaps you've kind of disconnected from because of politics?
Have a conversation and set honest goals for that conversation. And what we talk about when we say setting an honest goal, it's to learn from each other. I'm never going to agree with Steve, nor he with me. But every time we sit down and talk, we learn something from each other. We check our opinions against the other's opinions. And what we ask people to do is have an honest conversation. Don't try to convert the other person. I'm never going to convert him. Don't preach. Leave your self-righteousness at the door and actually sit down and ask questions. Listen to the answers.
Humility is such an interesting thing that goes with civility.
Right.
I think you have to have humility before you can have civility, because if you think you're always right, you'll never learn anything. This is such an interesting book. I can't wait to read it myself. Thank you so much for bringing it to our attention and for talking about it on the show. We've talked to lawmakers who've told us, hey, we pitched to Fox News and MSNBC and told them we'd like to talk about the bipartisan bill, and they've said, no thanks. We like to talk about the fight. So clearly that is a problem as well. But you know what? We're just scratching the surface. We hope you'll come back, Nolan and Stephen, and talk about the civility book.
Thanks.
Thanks for your time. That is the Pulse for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Ruth Paraj. As always, it was great to be with you.